Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Greenlit, where we break down how well-known television and film projects get made and the people behind the scenes that help push them over the edge. Today I'm talking with Jack Bender. Jack's a legendary producer across both independent as well as studio level projects over the last several decades. We've had the pleasure of working with Jack over the years and knowing him as a friend and colleague. And first off, thank you, Jack, for taking the time out of the day.
My pleasure. Great to be here with you.
Well, let's start maybe at the beginning in terms of how you got into the business, what drew you to it, and perhaps even a little bit more on some of your story around how much you've seen the business change. As obviously you've had a number of very well-known projects that have had, again, studio backgrounds down to independent backgrounds, and how you've seen that ebb and flow throughout your career so far.
Yeah, sure. Happy to. Yeah, it's been a journey, almost about 30 years, independent and studio films. Started out in Detroit and doing comedy concerts with my brother Mike, who was a stand-up at the time out here in LA. And he came back to Detroit, and we decided to put together some comedy concerts and promote them, do live concerts. And so started doing that, brought out some comedians from here, Tim Allen, Paul Rodriguez, Dave Coulier, and Mike. And we put together a night of music and comedy and did live performances. And surprisingly, or not too surprisingly, that did quite well. And we had success with that. It was called the Detroit Comedy Jam. And it's a long story, but in brief, George Carlin, we approached George Carlin when he was in town, and he helped us. He came aboard and helped produce it and sell it to HBO. So that's what got me in the bug of showbiz, and so I moved to Hollywood.
What was the year, Jack, and how old were you? And yeah, obviously awesome. And we can go into your brother as well and your working relationship there. But how old were you at that point? And had you had any foray at all into entertainment before that series?
No, that was the beginning of it. Mike was young. I was young. I was about 25. He's about 5 years older than me, and he had left a few years earlier to go to Hollywood and make his way in stand up. And I was just out of college and trying to figure out what I was going to do. And we came together to do that, and just fell in love with it immediately. So no, that was my first foray into showbiz, and just grabbed it by the reins and loved it. And I was nicknamed PT Barnum at the time because I was out there promoting the shows constantly. And
Yeah.
we had lines around the block, and it was just so exciting to have the comedians come in. And then eventually, after a couple years of doing that, we raised independent financing to film one of it, and actually it's one of the first filmed comedy concerts other than Richard Pryor's. And so we raised the funding independent, had no distribution, filmed at the Fisher Theater in downtown Detroit. And it took us a while, but like I said, eventually with the help of George Carlin, we got it to HBO and sold it to HBO. So then I moved out here and worked my way up in the business. I started over getting coffee, as you do. I was in the right place at the right time. Answered the phone, and they said, we need someone to come on to a Robin Williams special, help us out. And I said, great, we'll send over Jack. He'll be coming over. So I went over and started working with Vic Kaplan and Robin Williams stand-up specials at HBO. And that began a series of years of working on HBO shows and series, culminating with Not Necessarily the News that I worked on with
Yep.
Moffat Lee Productions for many years, but in between doing a lot of specials, Emmy Awards, Ace Awards. We did a lot of award shows. And then I answered an ad in the Variety for the assistant to an Academy Award producer, and I ended up working with Michael Phillips, who produced The Sting and Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and helped Michael keep his company moving forward when it was going through transition, and found myself in my first week in the president of production office at Warner Brothers, Paramount, and several other companies. So quickly deep into the mix, and that really cemented me into the business.
And what year? What was that? Just so
So,
curious, and also curious what kind of transition that type of legacy production company and producer was going through at that time.
yeah, so that would have been about 1985, 1986 when I
Okay,
was producing the Comedy Concerts of Detroit. I moved out here in 87. I worked on HBO shows. I transitioned to Michael Phillips Productions in 90 and worked with Michael, was elevated to vice president of creative affairs. We had open writing assignments and directing assignments across town. It was a great time in the business.
it's excellent. And from there, how did you get into putting your first independent films or your first films together that got off the ground into production?
Well, I was working with Michael on a couple films for HBO Cinema Plus at the time, and my brother was moving on to writing from doing stand up, but also we talked a lot about writing, and he is an excellent writer. And he wrote a script called Crossing the Bridge that the producers on the film I was working with Michael on got involved coincidentally. I'm not sure how that all happened, but they came to us and said we want to make this film, and we arranged financing through it was Columbia TriStar Home Video at the
Okay,
time was doing financing of independent pictures, and that was a movie we did in Minnesota, and so I came on board as a co-producer in that. I had to leave my job with Michael, sadly, but he well understood. And that got me into producing. That was picked up by Disney eventually, and then I became an on-the-lot producer at Disney, creative and production producer at Disney. And then they financed our next film, which was called Indian Summer, with Alan Arkin, Diane Lane, Kevin Pollak, and Bill Paxton. And so that was we're again well on the way then to making movies. Shot that up in Canada.
understood. Understood. I mean, interesting hearing a lot of this. Frankly, Jack, I didn't even know. So curious about working on the lots and selling things directly to studios or partnering with studios or HBO. How much does that differ from the business today in terms of streamers eating so much of the pie and also independent financing being so critical to being able to get the smaller films made? Is it a completely different business than what you remember back through some of these stories?
Yes and no. I'd say the walls are higher in both regards. What was great was being able to cycle back and forth between the independent world and the studio world. I've done many independent films and many studio films, and they each have their own challenges, closing deals and arranging financing. And I think those walls have just gotten higher now. Obviously the streamers have stepped in to fill the void and a lot of the world. But as far as the independent films, that's still a challenge, and the lower budget, under 10 million, is still a challenge to get those up and running. And as the studio films, as we all know, is just they're making less and less of them, and only bigger and bigger ones.
Sure.
So I think those walls are higher, and the independent film business remains challenging. I think there's still a large amount of investors out there, but then finding the right deal for them with the distribution and the foreign sales is the trick. So I think that's the most challenging part right now, is the independent foreign sales, and finding the right mix for
Sure.
a streamer to pick it up.
Sure. Shifting gears, just for a second, I want to come back to the challenges and the ways you've navigated them, but I want to shift for a minute into working with your brother, which you've done for many, many years, and my understanding very closely. Both of you have had really interesting careers away from each other, really interesting careers crossing over with one another. How has that been? We work with plenty of folks that work with family members, produce, direct, write with different members of the family, and it seems like the entertainment business is still very much there's elements of family, and elements of apprenticeship in it, very much so, even still currently. How has that been for you? And just again, how has it been navigating that as you guys have mounted so many different types of projects over the years?
Yeah, it's been a great experience. I mean, we worked together for about 20 years on studio and independent films, and it was just a great experience. We just loved working together. And as you can imagine, we developed a great shorthand. At one point, we were just rolling pictures every other year, and we could launch a picture at a certain point. We could launch a picture with a couple words together. And
Hmm.
we just say, we're doing it. We're going here. We're going to London. We're doing this. We're good. We're off to the races on this. And we just both knew what to do. We each had our own lanes to work in, and we would launch a picture. And that was our biggest thing, was just getting them launched. We very much fought an uphill battle of not falling into development hell and just accelerating the process as much as possible. And we were so streamlined, it really worked well. I was handling, for the most part, physical and finance, and he was handling creative and casting, and together we'd work on everything. But for the most part, we had our lanes, and it was a joy. It was a great joy. People used to always say to me, "How do you work with your brother or your sister?" I could never work with my brother or my sister, and we just never really thought about it. We just enjoyed. Mike's a very funny guy, first of all, so it's always good laughs, and we were just both very dedicated to making our jobs work. And so we worked many years. We were on the lot at Disney. We were on the lot. Then we went over to Columbia Pictures, and we made a picture over at Columbia. Then we went back into independent film, raised independent financing, did about 4 or 5 pictures. Alan Rickman, Colin Firth. Then we went to, where did we go to? Then we did The Upside of Anger,
Yep.
independent financing with a company called Mediate. Funny enough, I was listening to your podcast with Mark Damon the other day.
Yeah.
Mark's a good colleague, and he reached out to us for that picture.
Mm.
It was great working with Mike because he was such a great writer, and he just developed a greater writing style as he went along. And at one point, that was one of the hottest scripts in Hollywood. And Mark picked it up and put us into production. We went and shot that in England for the UK film tax credit.
Mm.
And Mark was working on something in Wales at the time. I think he wanted us to check out Wales, but we didn't think we'd get Kevin Costner down to Wales at the time.
Yeah.
So we based in London, and it was shot in our hometown of Birmingham, Michigan. So that was a challenge. And I'd already done several sale leaseback films in the UK.
Yep.
We did a series of Brit comedy fusion that we called it, together in England. So I was really familiar with working over there. And then once they set up their film tax credit, that was great. That really made things a lot easier than the old system. And then we went on to do a film called Man About Town with Ben Affleck, that Media8 likewise financed. And Upside of Anger went to New Line. Man About Town went to Lionsgate. And then we went on to we do Reign Over Me at Columbia Pictures. So I was back on the lot at Columbia Pictures, which was like being home again, and it was just great. They were great people to work with at the time. And made Adam Sandler, Don Cheadle, Liv Tyler, Jada Pinkett Smith. It was a comedy, dramatic comedy. They weren't 100% on board with making, because they weren't sure about Adam Sandler being in a dramatic film, but he just
Sure.
nailed it. Adam just nailed it out of the ballpark, and everyone was so happy that we did make it. But
Yeah.
that was a challenge. Talk about getting greenlit.
Yeah.
That was a challenge. They really, I think I did about 100 budgets on that movie, just to prove. They just wanted me to prove I could do it for the number, and
Sure.
I really had to. And
Well, I'm really curious, just not to jump in, but I'm so
sure.
curious around some of these huge names you worked with over the years are true old school movie stars, when movie stars really existed and really carried movies, right? You talk about Ben Affleck, you talk about Costner, you talk about Sandler, you talk about Ethan Hawke, on First Reformed a couple of years ago. I want to get into First Reformed as really the main project to drill into. But if you could speak just more broadly about, you made a comment, Jack, about hey, the biggest challenge right now seems to be the foreign sales game and distribution and structuring the right deal on that side. From a casting standpoint, you guys have had a tremendous run with putting, again, some really quality actors, but also quality movie stars into these projects. How have you seen that change? And if there's any stories or tips and tricks from the trade over the years that you could share or impart on folks that are watching or listening.
Sure, yeah, I'd be happy to. I was kind of thinking about it the other day, and what's the secret formula? You always have to revisit it, and it sounds cliche, but it goes back to the script. The reason we were able to get these great actors is because the screenplay, and they just wanted. It's a project they wanted to do, and the writing was good. I mean, you watch. There's so much product out there now, and sometimes you say to yourself, what happened to good writing,
Sure, sure.
and yeah, you can get stars and you throw money at them if you're that fortunate to have money to throw at them. But the level we were doing movies at, which was always, at kind of a discounted rate, was we didn't have the full boat to go. So the attraction was a screenplay. And again, as I was thinking about that, hats off to Mike being such a great writer that and a great director that people want to work with. So I always say people want to work with people they want to work with. So that's a
Sure.
big help. That's a big help. You just got to be someone with a career that people want to work with, and I think your track record is important in that regard. I've been very attentive to try and make sure my track record remains solid. And for that reason, people want to work with you because they know you do quality work.
Hmm.
You don't compromise and just do things for any reason other than it being a quality project that you're proud of and that you will be years later, which thankfully I am. But again, just gets back to the screenplay to answer your question. It's so cliche, but it's so true.
Sure.
It's the writing, and I think actors that expect, and this was back when I was making those films, but now there's so much money in the business from the streamers, and the actors are so booked, and they're getting so many offers and so many projects, and the talent pool of actors that make a movie go is small as
Yep.
ever, and so they have their choice of projects. I don't think it's about money for them. I think it's about the quality of the project, the quality of the people involved, and the quality foremost of the screenplay and the writing. Is it good writing? And I think that makes their job easier, very, very much so, and more enjoyable. And I think that's a key function that cuts through, other offers they might have for more money or different teams. So I'd say that's probably remains years on the single most important ingredient.
Yep. Understood. Talking just for a moment about that pool of actors that can actually greenlight a piece of content these days being very small. Is it the smallest you've ever seen it in your career in terms of what actually gets something going?
Good question. No, I think there's a lot of up and coming actors, and I think we're in a period of discovery where there's a new opportunity, and I think streaming affords opportunities for unknown talent to come into the scene. And with the blurring of film and television, with the streaming world, I I'd say the stars are still limited. The top 20 or 30 or 40, A-list stars is as limited as ever. But I think there is more of an opportunity for newcomers to come along and stand out. And if they have a great team, a great director, great producer, great screenplay behind them, or teleplay behind them, they can stand out. So yeah, I think it's still very small as far as the independent world. And there's as we all know, there's like 5 names that'll greenlight an independent picture.
Yeah.
One of those 5 names. And then on the bigger level, there's probably 20 or 30 names and they're just so that pool remains small. But again, I think there's an opportunity. Finally, we're seeing that it's not always the A-list top name actor that can greenlight a picture. You know, if the package is good, if the director is talented, the screenplay is excellent, I think an actor can have a shot at helping greenlight a picture.
Just a really quick question on this. A movie like Reign Over Me, does that movie get greenlit today? If so, what's different about it than when you got it made first time around?
Gosh, that's tough. You know, Adam Sandler was the driving force behind that. Obviously, you know, he was a big star at Columbia with all his comedies, and he wanted to make the film, you know, and it was a tough sell. Funny enough, they were not sure that Adam in a drama was going to be a winner. And he was steadfast and driving on it and wanted to make the movie. And he was adamant about it. And, you know, once he got his teeth into it and we approached him about it and talked to him about it, he just fell in love with the role and he wanted to do it. So would that get made today? Probably not at the studios.
Yeah.
As a streamer movie, sure. I mean, again, if it was Adam today, you know, with his star has just only gotten much bigger and brighter. You know, he proved himself with the Netflix deal, and he's just cranking out movies left and right, and they're all doing very well. And he's very happy at Netflix. They're very happy with him. It sure seems. And so I think if, you know, when you get to that level of star power, if you want to make that movie, I think, yes, that would get made.
Let's shift gears for a second, Jack, onto uh, First Reformed. How did that come across your desk? And for listeners familiar with the project or those unfamiliar with the project, very legendary writer director with Paul Schrader and Ethan Hawke starring, ends up getting Oscar nominated, I believe, best screenplay if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
Jack.
Correct. Yes.
A24 distributes, do a phenomenal job on the marketing front, which really seems to be such a strong suit for A24. And the movie has a really, really great life in an environment where releasing content with independent partners is really difficult. And that film really stood out in a really big way, going through awards season in a huge way. But how did it come across your desk? How did you get involved with it? And again, that seems like such a late career win for you, right? After a couple decades of doing this, you said that's a big win, especially with how much this business has ebbed and flowed and evolved. So I'd love to just understand those pieces coming together and how you sort of see it now in the rearview mirror of a couple years back.
Oh, sure. Great. Thank you. I appreciate your kind words about that. Yeah, it was definitely very very happy to work on that movie and help put it together. So that after I did a couple independent pictures after being at Columbia Pictures and several independent film raises. And a friend of mine who owns a company called Atomic Arts, visual effects company, we became good friends, met in LA through a producer friend, was on the Lock Stock movies, and he invited me up to meet a friend of his, and we became fast friends. And we were just kicking around the idea. And at one point, he was getting very busy with his visual effects company. He said, "Here, there's an office in London. Go upstairs. Let's form a film company and make movies." And I'm like, sounds like a great idea. And what I was trying to do with the partners that came together, the idea was, you know, instead of this one-off independent film business, you know, let's try and build a company, raise capital, and keep it flowing, kind of like the Buffalo 8 model, keep it moving forward and a continuous flow. And so that's what we were trying to build. And so we went out and we put together a team, and we put out the word that we were building this company and put all our reputations on the table. And we just did independent raise in London and raised financing for the company with the idea that we were going to keep making films. And so we were at a certain point, we did raise enough we had, we're trying to find that sweet spot. What's the sweet spot? Obviously, you're always trying to find the right budget level for the market. And we had good advice from our sales agent partners, and we were ready to go. So we were looking for project when we kicked the tires of a lot of projects. We were reading a lot of scripts, looking at many projects, lots of fits and starts, boarded a couple, more than a couple that seemed like they were going, and at the last minute for some reason they didn't go. I remember there was a Jeremy Irons movie we were doing, and then at some point it didn't go forward. And then so the First Reform came across my desk, and I read it, and I was just immediately blown away. I'm like, this is a great film. This is a great director. We've got to do this film. So I went to my partners and I said, this is the one. This is the one for us. And they all agreed, and they were all keen on it, but they weren't sure. They weren't sure about it. And I said, look, it's not going to be a massive moneymaker, but it's going to be a festival darling. It's going to be an awards winner. It's a quality film, and everybody agreed, and everybody said, all right, let's do it. So we moved forward. The film was coming together. Killer Films, Christine Vachon was the spearhead on the film, and they had up and down roller coasters trying to get it made. And for some reason, the timing just worked out perfectly for us. We needed to spend, based on our raise, we had to deploy the capital, and they needed to go into production. They had time restraints as well. So the timing just worked out perfectly. And we had full confidence in the team, and we moved forward, and we all moved forward together, and Paul just did an amazing job. I mean, he is just a master, and Ethan was just a joy to work with, and such a professional. The film really went forward without a hitch. It was really great. And then when we came out, we're launched at the Venice Film Festival, and then shortly thereafter it became the highest rated and reviewed movie of the year of its release. And so we're really happy with it. We're really happy with A24. They did a great job with it, and it's great to see it still out there today, and yeah, got great recognition. I mean, Ethan Hawke just did such an amazing job in that film, and Amanda Seyfried as well. They were just terrific, and just great to work with the Paul Schrader. He was just a master.
It's great. And I'm so curious, when it came to you, when it hit the desk the first time, was Ethan Hawke attached? Was that the scheduling constraint that really had to go pretty quickly, so you guys had to make a swift decision?
Exactly. Yes, Ethan was attached. They had lost their financing, or they didn't have enough at some point, and then we came in and replaced it all. And he had a window, and so yeah, we had to get in and get out very quickly. We had to move very quickly on it. Absolutely, it was an opportunity that had to be seized.
It's great. It's great. Can you speak at all about working with A24, and again, for this generation of younger filmmakers, people coming up now, cutting their teeth, that have gotten interested in basically this era's version of Miramax, right? Making cutting edge, really zeitgeisty content, director and auteur driven, things that really make you get excited about movies. How was it working with them? I think that company represents, for these younger generations, such a huge sea change, if you will, in independent content, right? They built effectively a brand, and that brand now is across so many different areas of consumer facing, brand facing, but it stands for something, right? Original stories, original voices. And from a marketing standpoint, they really seem like the strongest domestic film and television marketer certainly I've ever seen.
Yeah, I agree. They're the prestige label of our day. You're right. They're like our Miramax of days past, and they have great taste, and they're a great team, great people to work with. They came aboard early, and they were very steadfast and very committed. And I think they did a great job with it. You know, I've worked with many studios over the years, and you get to learn, you know, how they work and how the flow works. And they were very professional, extremely professional in every way. And, certain regrets. I wish, I think if everybody knew how well received it would have been critically, maybe perhaps might have thrown a little bit more into the release.
Sure.
And as well with the international, I think the film got ahead of itself a bit ahead of the reviews in terms of its release. So my only criticism would be that it would have been nice if the critical reviews and critical acclaim had been a bit more in sync with the release, as far as timing wise and the spend wise. But they did a great job. The marketing materials were great. The release platform was great. Universal released it internationally. Yeah, that they were just a joy to work with, a real pleasure to work with. And
Sure.
yeah, they're doing quality films. But yeah, that would be my only criticism. That I was like, wow, there was a slight opportunity missed because it was just so well received and critically acclaimed that if there was been a bit more sync up on the release with that, I think it would have even been more widely viewed theatrically. But of course, it lives online and having a great life.
Did A24 do the Universal deal? Did you guys do that directly? Just curious who handled foreign on it. And maybe just for
No,
the wider audience, speak a bit to the foreign process for some that might not be as attuned as you and I talk about this all day, every day.
yeah. No, we did that in-house. That was a separate deal from them. They didn't take international, so we did that separately. We worked with a foreign sales agent and our relationships. We have strong relationships with Universal and the majors. All of us being practitioners over 25 plus years,
Right.
and so no, we carved that deal out in-house. And but it wasn't an easy sell. Again, when as you get in a certain level without patting yourselves on the back, you get to a certain level of quality film. It's sometimes a tough sell. To
Very much.
It's antithetical to the concept that a higher quality film that we all had complete confidence in and thought was going to do very well and be very well received, and in the end it was.
Yep.
It's always a hard sell convincing distributors to see that. And again, I think someone at some point might have thought to themselves there, oh boy, if we had really pushed this a little bit more, we probably could have gotten a little bit more as well. But we were happy with it. We were happy with the release. It was a win. It was a critical acclaimed film. It made its money back plus, and it continues to have a life. And it was just such a crowning achievement for Ethan and for Paul and for Amanda that we couldn't have been happier with the way it all turned out.
Great.
Albeit again, it's hard to anticipate how well something might be received. Yeah, it's always a kind of we always had a running theory, get your next film out before your last one is released. Get your next one in production before you went back, because you never know how it's going to be received. So to be able to anticipate how well it was received was no one could have expected it. We knew it would be well received, but not as nicely as it was and kindly as it was.
Sure. Shifting gears again, if you don't mind. I'm so
Sure.
curious about your experience in television. My research, getting ready for this discussion, and I saw that you've done a couple series over the years. The Mind of a Married Man back in the early 2000s, I think 20 plus episodes, and then The Comedy Store as well, more recently. What were those experiences like in terms of being different than the film side? And obviously, I think everyone knows television seems like it's just eaten the industry as much of it as it can, especially as streaming has really pivoted its model to really be series, both limited and long format series focused. What was the difference there? Did you enjoy those as much? Do you see television continuing to become more and more of what you'll focus on?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Y'all, I loved working in television. I mean, I'm really a film guy, but working on HBO, spending so much time as I did working on their series, coming up the ranks. I started out as a PA, moved up as a coordinator, and I was a production manager, and then a producer. I had grown up in the ranks of HBO, so when we sold the series to them, Mind of the Married Man, it was. It was a transition from we had just come off a series of independent films, low budget independent films, and it was what was astonishing was how much money at that time. It's nothing now, but at that time I was like, my God, I could make a movie for what they're doing. They're willing to spend on an episode,
Right.
and so that was exciting, and it was great working with HBO and working here at Culver Studios, what was then the Culver Studios, now Amazon. And it was great. It's a different experience, obviously. You're doing a weekly show, and it's very compact and much more character driven and story driven, writer driven, teams of writers. And it was a comedy show, so it was a lot of fun on the set. I really enjoyed working on it. And like I said, at the time, HBO, that was the crowning years for them, as they've continued to do.
Yep.
But it was just, I'd say the biggest difference was the amount of freedom and the amount of money that was available to make the show, which was great because we could, build the sets we needed to build and go shoot in Chicago. And the film was set in, or the series was set in Chicago, so we did some great shooting there, which was exciting. And no, it was a great experience. It was great. We did 2 seasons, and then we were hoping we'd get picked up for a third season. For some reason, at some point, they made a decision not to pick it up for a third season. So we went to London to make The Upside of Anger, and funny enough, they called us later and said, "Oh, we want you to do season 3," and we're like, "Well, we're on to making our next movie." So that boat kind of sailed. So and then the Comedy Store, that was my brother Mike. I mean, he was the genesis of both projects, but Mike grew up in the Comedy Store. When, like I said, when he moved as a kid out to LA, he became the doorman at the Westwood Comedy Store and worked his way up to being a comedian and getting on stage. So he grew up there with all the greats, all the comedy greats. So when it came time to put together the show, he was the right guy for it. He knows all the comedians. He knows the history really well. So he rang me up one day and said, "Look, I want to do this series. Why don't you come on board and help me out?" And so I was happy to. We actually were trying to shoot a lot of stuff during COVID, which was really challenging. Trying to shut down Hollywood Boulevard,
Sure.
Sunset Boulevard in the middle of COVID, and so we ran into all kinds of challenges there. But we managed to do it. We kind of locked ourselves indoors in a lot of places and just shot. Actually built a little set on top of the roof of the Comedy Store and filmed up there because it's the only place we could get into. and so that went to Showtime, and no, that was really exciting to be back at the Comedy Store because I grew up there with Mike in the late 80s, early 90s. We spent so much time there. I used to go sit in the audience of every show, every set he did, and would critique his act, and we'd talk about the jokes he was going to do, and hang out with all the comedians, Jim Carrey, Eddie Murphy, and Jay Leno, and Letterman, and it was an exciting time. So it was great to be back in that world, and that's Mike's world. He grew up in the world of stand-up comedy, so it was a natural for him.
It's excellent. Well, I know, Jack, we're about to be up on time here, but I usually end these discussions with some version of the question of, okay, we've just spent a half hour, 45 minutes talking about really the high points of your career and what you've seen. As you look back on it, and people are listening or watching this that are earlier stage, whether just starting or building or going through challenging times as the industry continues to evolve, what's the piece of advice you offer either the younger version of yourself as you're going through a lot of these difficult periods of your own that you were able to navigate, but then also that imparts to other folks as well that are building now, looking to get projects greenlit?
Sure. Yeah. Well, it's been a real pleasure. You know, I have these consistent mantras, you know, and one of them is, and as corny as it sounds, people like to work with people they like to work with. So don't be a dick.
Yeah.
Don't be someone that's difficult to work with, because as much as you think, oh, it's all about the material, it's all about this and all about the deal and all about the money, at the end of the day, people work hard in this industry and they don't want to work with people who are difficult to work with. And once you get a reputation or you're known as someone who's difficult to work with, that just makes it harder, will make it harder on your life. You know, yes, you can work if you're not the most pleasant person to work with, but you're not going to be the first choice, perhaps. But more importantly, it's the material, and it's tried and true. I've said it before. It's all about the writing. You know, for me, there's just nothing better than great writing. There's just nothing better, you know, and you can see it, you can smell it, you watch it on TV, you watch it at the theater. If it's not great writing, you know, it pulls you out of the movie, it pulls you out of the show. It doesn't excite you, it doesn't engage you. And then great writing, on the other hand, does the very opposite. It pulls you in, it puts you into that world that we all want to go into, that world of creativity, of another place that only a cinema or a great television show can take you. And so it's the writing. It's all about the writing. And then once you have the great screenplay, it's about, you know, one of my philosophies has always been, you know, again, easy to say, but just launching film. Get the film launched, get it made, do everything you possibly can to move it forward, and, you know, get rid of things that are in your way of moving it forward, and launch the film. And don't let things tie you up. Don't get tied up in it. Move it forward. Be it, you know, and for creatives out there, you know the business side. You know, as you know, I do an extensive amount of budgeting.
Yep.
And I'm very, very adamant that the way forward is to have a budget that you can take to financiers, and that budget tells you a lot about, tells a financer a lot about you and a lot about the movie. And some, you know, people tend to discount that as, oh, it's just a thing that you need to do. It's not. It's a reflection on you, the filmmaker, and your knowledge, your understanding, and likewise your understanding of the business and the finance plan, and knowing how films get made, how they get financed. So my advice is to understand the business. Even if you're creative, if you wish to be the driver of the project, then you need to understand the business and study the business to understand how the financing works, and, you know, everything we just talked about. You know, how films get made. You know, if you just want to sell your screenplay, that's a different thing. But if you want to be involved in the production and move it forward, you need to treat it like a business.
It's great. Really great advice. Well, thank you again for spending the time. Really, really appreciate it. Kudos again. It's a great run.
Pleasure. And I just also want to say I have just the utmost respect for you and your company, Matthew. I've known you for many years and seen what you've built, and just hats off to you. Just congratulations on what a great company you've built.
Thank you so much. It means a lot, especially from someone who's done it for a while and been around a lot of different versions of what this business looks like.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you again.
My pleasure. Take care, Matthew.